Christopher Moltisanti is a key character in The Sopranos, who begins as someone New Jersey mob boss Tony Soprano grooms to become his number two and potentially his successor as the new boss of The Sopranos. Technically his cousin, Chris is treated by Tony as his nephew, and from an intellectual perspective he's sharp as a fucking cue ball, constantly making errors and mistakes in judgment in early seasons. Emotional, impatient, and unable to reflect enough to realize how much of his success is due to nepotism, Christopher can be a frustrating guy. That's not to mention his treatment of Adriana, his drug and booze addiction to boot. That said, there is a human element to Chrissy that bleeds through the screen, a flawed young man who recognizes he wants something more for himself, who is desperate to find his place in the world, to find his arc, to possibly even pursue a life outside of the mob, which speaks to one of the central themes of the show, that of identity. It is often the characters who are able to contemplate their place in the world, who try to tackle the big questions, like Tony, Chrissy, even AJ, who exhibit the most amount of anxiety and tension in the show whilst presenting a strong front, exhibiting the traits of the sad clown which Tony talks about in his therapy sessions with Dr. Milfy, whereas other characters like Paulie, hardly the sharpest tool in the shed, seem to live a more carefree life, exhibiting the traits of the happy wanderer Tony laments about in his therapy sessions. Chris often falls from one extreme to the other. He's complicated, but there is a level of maturity that develops over the course of the show, albeit slowly. One could argue that it correlates with Tony and Chris drifting apart, a byproduct of which is Chris potentially crawling out from under Tony's considerably large shadow. There's plenty of events that cause the two men to slowly separate. In general, Tony starts to see that Chris is clearly not the man who will lead this family into the 21st century. And that isn't just because we're already in the 21st century, but due to his constant screw-ups and addictions making him a liability. From Chrissy's side, he feels ostracized when Tony B comes out of the can and the two Tonys become close at the expense of Chris. There's also the Tony and Aid in the car thing, whatever happened there. And of course the death of Adriana, which weighed heavily on Chris. And at one point when he brings it up, Tony cruelly asks him how long he's going to play the Adriana card. Something has clearly broken between the two men, maybe in and around the end of season 5 and the beginning of 6A, not helped by Tony feeling Chris is distracted by his Hollywood business with the likes of Sir Ben Kingsley, and Chris's sobriety means the two cannot have as much fun as they used to back in the days. They get close, declaring their love and adoration for each other after stealing wine from the biker gang, but a later moment of camaraderie, done when both are sober, falls flat and ends in awkward silence. The drift is more apparent in season 6B, which, if you notice, Christopher is hardly in, and when he is in it, the storylines aren't really directly connected to Tony. Tony is beside himself when he learns that the adulterous mob boss in the Chrissy-produced Cleaver is based off him, and he begins to find Bobby Bacala a more suitable replacement for the role he once envisioned for Christopher, increasing the distance between the two. In the backyard barbecue scene, an episode before Tony kills him, and in a scene that is so layered it deserves its own video, Chris also shoots down Tony's idealized version of Chris's father, Dickie Moltisanti, saying he was nothing more than a junkie. This scene really flips the classic Tony and Chris dynamic on its head. Once upon a time, it was Tony at the grill, and he's still trying to school Chris on the stakes, but Chris demonstrates a better understanding of their situation. Chris just seems so much more mature here, content too, but we can talk about this scene in another video. There's a really interesting deleted segment in this show which takes place the following episode, Kennedy and Heidi, shortly before the drive from New York where Chris is killed. Tony and Calm arrive at Christopher's house, taking him by surprise as he's hosting for some friends of his, civilians, Americans, and there's an awkward atmosphere. I can't link the full scene, of course, due to copyright, but I think I can get away with the audio and a few clips. So as Tony and Carmela walk up to the house, they notice a lot of cars parked in Chrissy's driveway, and another car pulling up.
I think they have something going on. We should have called first.
Tony, Carm.
Hey, sweetie.
Hi, honey. Hello. Come on in. Oh, hi, guys.
Hi, everyone. So we caught you in the middle of something. I'm sorry, Tony, we should have called.
Oh, no, come on in, come on in. Chris will be so glad to see you. He's in the great room.
We were passing by on our way to the boat, and it hit us maybe you'd want to come. You know, we're taking up the Hudson to Piermont, sort of spur of the moment.
Yeah, there's a new Tuscan place up there.
Shoot, that would have been so great. Oh, Chandrakanta. Oh, hi.
So beautiful, your yard.
Listen, Kelly, we'll just...
Have a drink at least. Tony, Carmela, Sal, and Chandrakanta Pisano.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Their daughter Debbie is upstairs asleep with Kate. They had a play date.
Play date. She's 8 months old.
Can we just go?
You were the one who said we'll have a drink.
I was just nodding my head to be polite.
I said I'm a major fan of The Usual Suspects. This is some pleasure to meet you. Danny goes, that's my brother. I go, I'm sorry, Stephen Baldwin, of course. So he go, what are you doing here?
We should have called first.
It was a spur of the moment.
Oh, what are you kidding? What are you drinking? Alan Rita, you know. These are our neighbors, Howie and Ellen Reinstein. Rich and Laura from our Mommy and Me group. Our cousins, Tony and Carmela Soprano. And in this corner, Joe Lewis and her husband, Mark. Joe did the publicity for the movie, but I don't think you met.
No.
I'm having my usual Canada Dry Club, VSOP, but name your poison.
I think we should go.
Yeah, we were just stopping by on the chance you were free. We're taking the Stugatz up far as the Tappan Zee.
The baby would have loved that.
New Tuscan place up there.
We should have called first.
Welcome to stay. I'm just gonna grill some sausage. Whole thing just sort of fell together.
Well, thank you, but the harbor master's waiting for us. We've got to unlock
You
the
sure? There's plenty of...
There they are.
Okay, so,
I'll walk with you. I got a call from John Stefano. Some bullshit at the transfer station. Fucking Phil ain't letting John drop his asbestos from the rip and skips no more. Phil says you want to talk about it, you got to come to New York.
so set it up.
This just sort of fell together.
You don't gotta explain. The harbor master's waiting?
Didn't want them to feel obligated.
It's kind of ridiculous.
What, are you all pissed off we didn't get invited? We were the rude ones showing up here like this.
Rude. No such thing as rude amongst family.
They have Sunday gravy with us and your sister every week. You ever think we could all use a break? I get bored with it. I could cry.
But you don't. You do what's necessary. Who are these people?
Later, Chris and his wife are saying goodbye to the guests.
Oh, you know, the Spider-Man 3 screening is next week. I bet I could get you in.
That would be fantastic. I should probably meet Tobey Maguire.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Good night. Bye. Are you okay?
Huh?
You're so wired.
Wow, look at this mess.
Oh, leave it for now.
I'll tell you something else. Fucking Tony this afternoon. You see that pissy look on his face? That was intentional, to ruin my day.
Well, they probably knew the party didn't just fall together. Obviously, we'd all gotten sitters.
So fucking what? This is my house. I'll invite who I want.
Sweetie, Tony and Carmela open their home to us constantly.
Yeah, right. Fucking Roach Motel, and we're the roaches who can't get out.
Chrissy, that is so mean.
What? Look at me with the fucking sugar. That's a stress from him.
Wipe your mouth.
It's the same molecule as alcohol, you know, except there's one extra chromosome. So what does that tell you?
The Sopranos contains quite a few deleted scenes that have been made public, some which add to the show and others which change it, like a scene where Tony and Vito talk while the parade float is on the lam, which we discussed in another video. There's other quote-unquote deleted scenes that were shot intentionally to make sure spoilers didn't get out, like a scene where Phil Leotardo shoots Tony. I liked this one though. I thought it was interesting, perhaps the most thought-provoking of all the deleted scenes. It contains a line that sounds like vintage Chris too. I should probably meet Tobey Maguire. One of the main reasons it's fun is the relatability of the scene. There's many scenes in the show that people from all backgrounds can relate to. Vito telling himself not to look at his watch when he's performing manual labour will speak to any working man or woman, for example. This scene too is very relatable on both sides. I'm sure many of us know the feeling of stumbling onto a gathering of a group of friends or something where you are tight with the people involved, but you yourself are not really supposed to be here right now. And Chris's side is very relatable. I've been in this situation loads of times. You just want to get something done. In this case, Chris having a good time with friends of his, not friends of ours. And the poor guy just can't catch a break because the one person he doesn't want showing up ends up doing so. You just want to achieve something on your own for once. Especially not with a volatile personality around. A man who's also your boss, so you have to act a certain way around him. Not to mention there's now a sense of resentment and bitterness that you now know will be there because you didn't invite said person. Chris starts munching down on some food towards the end of the deleted scene like Ginny Sack in her Rubenesque prime, and of course it's revealed that during the meeting with Phil, he was high. So could it actually be that, if we take the deleted scene into account, that it was Tony, with all his toxicity that Chris wanted to get away from, arriving at his party that caused a frustrated Chris to convince himself to inject a little something something, in which turn led him to flipping the car, and in which turn led Tony to kill him. It definitely adds to the idea that Tony is a constant negative influence on the people around him, even when he doesn't particularly mean it. Of course, one of the main takeaways from this scene is that Chris is able to function without Tony. He is able to entertain guests outside of Tony's inner circle, normal people, civilians, new friends and neighbours. It would be a slightly shell-shocking revelation to Tony, and an implication might be that, especially after the ending of the previous episode where Chris was humiliated by Paulie in front of the entire crew, that Chris is moving on from the mob, from that life entirely. Sure, he'll send Tony envelopes, but he's not in Tony's inner circle anymore. He's involved in the film industry. He's moving up and out. He's aware of the toxicity of the mob life, as per his barbecue talk with Tony, and he's organically and successfully moving away. He's making friends with real people who appreciate him for who he is. And then Tony drops in to remind Chris he can only move away so far. I wonder if it contributed to Chris's death. Not just Tony's resentment and embarrassment at not being invited to what was clearly not a spur-of-the-moment thing, but Tony's realization that he is being cut off by Chris, that Chris doesn't want Tony sticking his beak in, and now the two aren't close. So now all Chris is to Tony is a liability who could sell him out. It's quite ironic then, seeing as though in the previous episode, Chris killed JT Dolan for pretty much the same reason, something we discussed in a previous video. Tony also doesn't like it when others are happy, like when he sabotaged Janice's Sunday dinner by bringing up Harpo, and Chris seemed happier than we've seen him in a long time. Is Tony jealous of Chris here? Bitter that he's created a network without him? It makes Chris's death even more darker, as many Sopranos fans consider it a pragmatic decision, but clearly there were also deeper feelings of resentment. Who are these people? Tony says to himself as he drives off. This is a man who has been unable to fit in with his own neighbours, shown as early as season 1, and yet Chris is doing it, which must have got to him. Plus, the line shows that Tony no longer knows what Chris is up to, what he's doing with his life. It's dangerous for him. I wonder why this scene was cut. It offered a glimpse into a happy Chris who had found contentment before his untimely death. I guess in a way it didn't fit with where it was. When you think of the trajectory of Chris in his last 2 episodes, he's on a major downturn, getting humiliated by the mob, killing JT, looking distracted during the meeting with New York, and then flipping the car before revealing he's on drugs. I suppose the scene doesn't quite fit in with all of that. Maybe it would have been best put somewhere earlier, probably before the part where everyone is laughing at Chris in the Bada Bing. I feel it would fit better in Walk Like a Man than in Kennedy and Heidi. We never really saw Chris normal after getting humiliated, but here he's laughing and joking. Timeline got fucked up. Plus, he's giving them Hollywood stories. Is that something that Chris should really be talking about, seeing as though he just shot his screenwriter friend an episode earlier? Perhaps it was a case, seeing as though Chris looks really erratic while he's eating and talking about Tony. He looks high almost, that the showrunners wanted us to find out that Chris was on drugs the same time Tony found out in the car, and this would have given it away. You do also have to wonder, would Chris have actually relapsed if it wasn't for Tony showing up unannounced, leading Chris to feel whatever he was feeling? Anger, nervousness, guilt. He would have also been irritated because the appearance of Tony would sour his reputation with his new friends, who react viscerally to seeing Tony, and they must have thought, wait, is our new neighbour connected to the mob? We also get a bit more of Kelly, and they actually felt like a real couple here instead of this sterile, after aid, through the motions rebound relationship that it otherwise feels like. Christopher is shown here living a real life. He was always searching for happiness, and I wonder if Tony took a look at what Chris had, his wife, his kid, what now made him happy, and knew deep down if Chris was backed into a corner, if he had to choose, he would choose this life and give Tony up. And also, of course, the perfect, happy Christopher life is one that doesn't include Tony Soprano. Interestingly, in Chris's death scene, Tony actually says, "So how was your party the other day at the house?" before they crash. So maybe if the scene was included, the showrunners would want it brought to our attention just before Chris flips the car. So what did you think of this deleted scene? Do you think it should have been included, or is it better cut out? Let me know in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.